Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was a quiet evening, the kind that lingers after a long day when the air seems to hold its breath. I had just come back from the grocery store, bags still resting on the kitchen counter, when I heard a gentle knock at the door. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling something loose, but the sound came again, deliberate, softer than a stranger's would be. When I opened it, standing there was someone I hadn't expected, my ex-husband's friend, Michael. Michael had always been in the background of my past life, present at dinners, barbecues, the occasional game night. He wasn't someone I had spoken to in years, not since my marriage had ended and all the familiar ties had unraveled. Yet there he was, standing on my porch with a hesitant smile, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket like he was carrying a weight he didn't know how to put down. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Memories rushed back, faces around tables, laughter that now felt like it belonged to someone else's life, and the shadow of choices that had led me here. I wondered why he had come, why now, after all this time. He looked older, not just in the lines across his face, but in the heaviness of his eyes. There was something he wanted to say, and the silence between us grew thick with unspoken questions. "I hope it's not a bad time," he said quietly, his voice careful, almost fragile. I stepped aside, letting him in. The living room was dim, only the soft light from a lamp in the corner filling the space. He stood awkwardly, shifting his weight, like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. I gestured for him to sit, and when he did, I noticed his hands trembling slightly, fingers interlacing as if to steady themselves. The air felt charged, though not in a way that frightened me. It was the weight of something long carried, something waiting to be released. I brought him tea, because sometimes that's the only way to bridge a gap between two people, and he accepted it with a small nod of thanks. The steam curled up between us, softening the edges of the moment. "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time," he said finally. His eyes didn't meet mine right away. Instead, they lingered on the cup in his hands, as though the story he was holding might slip out without his permission. "There are things you never knew. Things I should have said back then, but I didn't." My heart quickened. I didn't know what he meant, but something in his tone told me this wasn't idle conversation. There was a sincerity, a depth that reached further than the usual catching up after lost years. He wasn't here for small talk. He wasn't here for nostalgia. I leaned forward, my hands clasped loosely in my lap, waiting. Michael looked up at me then, and in his eyes, I saw not just the man I remembered from long ago, but someone transformed by time, by regret, by truths carried too long in silence. His voice was steady now, though low, as he began to share a story that would leave me shaken, one that reached into the past I thought I had neatly folded away. And in that moment I knew this visit was not about the past alone. It was about something larger, something that would ripple through the way I understood my own history and the people who had shaped it. The first words of his story hung in the air like a bell tolling in the distance, clear and undeniable, and I felt the ground shift beneath me as I realized this was only the beginning. The air between us grew heavy, like the pause before a storm. Michael shifted in his chair, the tea untouched in his hands, and for a long moment I thought he might lose the courage to say what he'd come to share. But then he drew in a deep breath, his voice carrying the weight of years left unspoken. "I was there more often than you realized," he began slowly. "Back when things between you and David were falling apart, I saw more than I let on. I told myself it wasn't my place, that friendships meant keeping quiet. But keeping quiet cost me nights of sleep. It cost me peace. Hearing my ex-husband's name after so long was like pulling open a drawer I had carefully shut. David, a man who had once filled my days with laughter and later emptied them with silence. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. Michael glanced at me, as if asking permission to continue, and I gave a small nod. "You never knew the whole of it," he said, his hands now clasped tightly around the cup. "David, he made choices that hurt you, choices that others of us saw but didn't stop. And I was his friend. I stood beside him when maybe I should have stood with you." His words sank into me like cold water, unsettling, stirring questions I had buried. 1,000 memories flickered in my mind. Those unexplained late nights, the arguments that ended in slammed doors, the way he had started to feel like a stranger under my own roof. I had told myself back then that maybe I was imagining things, that maybe it was my fault for not being enough. Now, hearing Michael's voice steady and remorseful, I realized I hadn't been imagining anything. "What are you saying, Michael?" My voice surprised me. It was calm, but underneath, there was a tremor I couldn't hide. He set the cup down and leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "I'm saying you carried pain that wasn't yours to carry. David wasn't honest with you. About his time, about his choices, about his promises." He paused, as if weighing whether to go further, then added, "And I knew. I knew more than I should have, and I said nothing." The room seemed to shrink around me. Part of me wanted to demand details, to pull the truth out of him piece by piece. But another part, the part that had survived those years and built something steady afterward, only wanted to understand why he had come now. "Why tell me this?" I asked softly. His eyes glistened, though he didn't cry. "Because silence has a way of rotting a man from the inside. I watched you carry yourself with grace, even when you didn't know the full truth. I saw you hold your head high while the ground shifted under you. And it haunted me. I couldn't live with the thought that you never knew you deserved better. That maybe you thought it was you who failed. It wasn't." The words pierced me deeper than I expected. For years, I had wondered, quietly, if I had been to blame for the way things ended. If I had not loved enough, not listened enough, not been enough. To hear that it wasn't my fault, that someone else had seen the truth all along. It felt like a door opening to a room I hadn't dared step into. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full, brimming with unspoken gratitude and sorrow. Outside, a breeze stirred the branches of the old oak tree by my window, its shadow moving across the floor like a reminder that time keeps going, no matter what truths finally see the light. "Michael," I said finally, my voice steadier now, "you've carried this for years. Why tonight? Why not years ago?" He exhaled, almost a sigh. "Because tonight I couldn't carry it one more day. I thought maybe telling you could give us both some peace." Peace. The word lingered. I wasn't sure if that's what I felt yet. But I knew one thing. His story wasn't finished. There was more buried in his pauses, in the heaviness of his voice, in the way he looked at me like someone asking forgiveness not only for what he did, but for what he didn't do. And I wasn't ready to let him leave until I heard it all. The lamp in the corner cast a soft glow, and the shadows it left on Michael's face made him look older, more worn. For a while, he sat with his head bowed, like a man gathering pieces of himself before handing them over. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the tremor of someone walking a line between confession and release. "There's something else," he said, his gaze finally locking with mine. "Something I never wanted you to hear, because it would hurt, but not telling you. It has hurt me for years." My breath caught, but I stayed quiet, waiting. David wasn't just careless, he continued slowly. He wasn't just drifting away. He betrayed you. Not once, not briefly. He built a pattern of it. And the worst part is, I saw it. I saw him make excuses. I covered for him when I should have spoken the truth. I told myself I was protecting a friendship, but what I was really doing was betraying your trust. The words hit me with a force that felt like both confirmation and devastation. A part of me had suspected it, back then, when his explanations didn't add up and his phone calls ended too quickly. But hearing it now, spoken aloud by someone who had been close enough to know, made the suspicion real in a way that left no space for doubt. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the chair. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the soft tick of the clock on the wall, they were the only sounds as I tried to absorb what I just heard. Michael's voice softened. I thought he'd change. I thought it wasn't my place to intervene. But watching the way you tried to hold your marriage together while he stopped, pressing a hand against his mouth as though the rest of the words were too bitter to speak. I should have told you. You deserved the truth back then. I opened my eyes and studied him. His face wasn't that of a man trying to wound me. It was the face of someone who had carried guilt like a stone in his pocket year after year. His shoulders slumped with it, his eyes tired from the weight of carrying secrets too long. And you carried this all these years. My voice was quiet, but sharper than I meant. Yes, he said simply. And it has eaten at me every day. I watched from a distance as you built a new life. You were stronger than I ever imagined. But I couldn't move forward without telling you what I should have said years ago. I needed you to know you were never the one who failed. Something in me shifted then. Anger, sorrow, relief. They all swirled together, impossible to separate. I thought of the nights I had cried myself to sleep, believing I was unworthy, that somehow I had fallen short. I thought of the years I had spent rebuilding piece by piece, always with a faint shadow of doubt lingering in the back of my mind. And now, here was Michael, offering me the truth, not to break me, but to free me. I didn't know what to say. My hands trembled slightly in my lap, and I clasped them together to still them. Finally, I whispered, "Why me? Why now?" He leaned forward, his voice steady despite the weight it carried. Because you deserve peace. Because I owed you honesty. And because I've come to learn that sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that heal us in the end. The silence that followed was thick, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of something long buried rising to the surface, with the recognition that no matter how late the truth arrives, it still has the power to change us. And though my heart felt heavy, I realized I wasn't angry at him. I was grateful for his courage, for his honesty, for the strange way life brings certain people back when you least expect it. What unsettled me most, though, was the look in his eyes. A look that wasn't just about confession, but about something more. Something unspoken. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The room felt different after his words, as though the very air had shifted. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves outside, the steady rhythm of the clock. But everything else seemed muted, held in suspension between what had been said and what was still waiting to be spoken. Michael sat quietly, his hands resting loosely on his knees now, the tension that had gripped him slowly unraveling. For a long moment, I had only looked at him. I saw not just my ex-husband's friend, but a man who had carried too much silence, a man shaped by mistakes he could never undo, and by a conscience that had finally demanded release. His confession had shaken me, but not in the way I had feared. It had unsettled something deep inside, loosening the chains of doubt and guilt I had unknowingly carried for years. "You should have told me then," I said softly, my voice steady though my heart was not. "But I can't hold you in the past. We've both lived too many years since." Michael's gaze met mine with a gentleness I had never noticed in him before. "I know," he said, his voice low, almost weary. "And I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to have the truth." We sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It felt open, like the air after rain when the world seems washed clean. I sipped the tea that had long since cooled and let the warmth of the moment settle around us. "I used to think I failed," I admitted quietly. "That maybe if I'd been better, if I'd done more, things might have turned out differently. But hearing you tonight, it changes that." His shoulders eased, as though my words had lifted something from him too. "You never failed," he said firmly. "And if nothing else, I hope you carry that with you from this night forward." There was a pause, and then something softer entered his expression, something almost hesitant. "The truth is, I admired you even back then. The way you carried yourself, the way you kept your kindness, even when things were hard. I never told you, because it wasn't my place, but I always thought you deserved more than what you were given." The words lingered in the space between us, delicate but undeniable. I didn't answer right away. My heart felt unsteady, not from anger anymore, but from the quiet surprise of hearing something I hadn't expected. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the friend of a man who had hurt me, but someone who had chosen, after all these years, to step into the uncomfortable light of honesty. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to," he replied. "Sometimes it's enough just to know the truth. The rest is for time to decide." And maybe he was right. Not every story ends with answers tied neatly in a bow. Some end with new beginnings, quiet ones, shaped by understanding and respect. As we sat there in the fading glow of the lamp, I realized this night wasn't about reopening old wounds. It was about closing them properly. Michael eventually stood to leave, and I walked him to the door. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and distant rain. He paused on the porch, looking back at me with a small, almost grateful smile. "Thank you for listening," he said simply. "Thank you for telling me," I answered. When the door closed behind him, I leaned against it, my heart full, not of pain, but of something quieter, reflection, release, a strange kind of peace I hadn't known I needed. His story had shaken me, yes, but it had also freed me. It reminded me that even truths delivered late can heal, that even broken pieces can settle into place when someone finally has the courage to speak them aloud. And as I turned off the lamp and walked toward my bedroom, I carried with me the sense that life, with all its unexpected turns, still had ways of surprising me, not with sorrow anymore, but perhaps, in time, with hope.